Hey everybody, welcome to the I303 podcast where we talk about ingenious insights and oddball opinions from the perspective of an IO. Today I'm joined by Gabby Enriquez and we're going to be talking about leadership. Is it still a thing in 2025? So with that, I have Gabby. Gabby, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more about yourself and your origin story.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Gabby Enriquez. I am the founder and CEO of HRBP Inc. Essentially, we offer outsourced HR, fractional HR, and people operation solutions for all business sizes. I have 20 plus years of HR experience. I have a psychology background and like yourself, an IO background as well. So human-centric approach is definitely my cup of tea. But unlike a lot of HR folks, I myself take pride in having to um, have a lot of experience with operational leaders. So I've led operational functions for organizations, worked with a lot of startups, mid-sized enterprise companies in all industries, done a lot of sales, training as well, and personal coaching.
Perfect. And what led you to
Yeah.
IO? Was there anything in specific, anything in particular that, psychology is pretty broad. We could have gone any route, clinical, forensic. Is there anything that led you to IO specifically?
So funny enough, I kind of started exploring clinical because I absolutely love how the mind works.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I thought it was going to go when I first started. But I was always working in HR, right? So I was always in that space. And then once I really started embracing what HR truly can do and the values it can bring to a workplace, then it sort of shifted. And then I started wanting to do a little bit more and dive into the profit, the margins, the how people work, how people improve, and how personal and work life really do merge and intertwine and affect our day to day. So that's what really then swayed me over to IO. I love assessments. I love good assessments because there are
There you
so
go.
many. And so really understanding how we can identify people's strengths, how to best utilize them in the workplace, and really kind of play with that. So that's what really pushed me into that direction.
Gotcha. So, like you, I also was considering clinical. One of the reasons I was looking into it is I'm not sure if you've seen the movie Saw,
Yeah.
but that movie had just come out, and in my head I was thinking, okay, what would lead somebody to want to go down that route? To set up these kind of elaborate traps and
Yeah.
have people try to escape them. Learn a little bit more about clinical and recognize, you know what? I don't know if I could deal with this all day, every day, individual after
Hmm.
individual. And so started looking around, and that's where I saw IO, and I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
people in the workplace, how they engage, how they work, definitely aligns with me. So,
Yeah.
based on your experience with people in the workplace, working in HR, working with business leaders, leadership is still definitely a hot topic. So,
Yeah.
with that said, I know from my perspective, and I'm interested in hearing yours, generations view leadership a little bit differently. Whereas older
Absolutely.
generations, the silent kind of the boomers, Xers, millennials, they still kind of have this perception that leadership is needed and it's a key quality, and people aspire to want to go into those roles. Are you still seeing that today?
Like you said, it's all very different per generation. So, is leadership still a thing?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Is it required? Is it necessary? I believe so. I hope so. However, it's going to look very different in the future. So, what it is today, what it used to be before, and what it's going to be in the future is going to be completely different. Generations such as millennials, such as myself, have a very different understanding and expectation of what leadership is and what it should be compared to boomers. And then Gen Z is up and coming ages right now, 13 to 28. A lot of them are really coming into and moving really fast into our industry, into the workforce. And that expectation in leadership is very, very different and affected a lot of their views by our millennial experience. So a lot of the Gen Z have now made a lot of their decisions as to what leadership should be and what the pros and cons are based on, their parents' experience.
Gotcha. And so, from their perspective, from a Gen Z perspective, do they see leaders different in terms of what constitutes an effective leader? Are they saying kind of different leadership approaches resonating more with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, funny enough, so I've worked on the workforce side. I've hired many Gen Z professionals, going into them and then training them into what corporate world looks like and expectations. I also have Gen Z kids. So
Okay.
we have a lot of these conversations at the table, and really understanding their expectations and sort of boundaries created. A lot of them are emerging as influencers and entrepreneurs themselves, right? So it looks very different. Gen Z grew up with a cancel culture, and TikTok transparency. So they
Yeah.
expect leaders to walk the talk. And if they don't, they're going to call them out on it.
Gotcha. And so has the definition of leadership changed or of a leader? Has that changed over time? And if so, what do you see as kind of the biggest differences between kind of a more traditional definition of leadership versus how younger generations are defining leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. So a leader to me is someone who influences, inspires, and equips others to move towards a shared goal, right? While holding themselves accountable, which is the big part, for both results and culture. So true leadership isn't about titles.
Yeah.
It's about trust, clarity, and consistent action. So it does look quite different in a boomer generation, right? For quite a quote unquote boomer.
Yeah.
In their expectations, leaders are these tenured, experienced folks that have been in the workforce for many years. And if you have, let's say, like myself, 20 plus years of experience in something, then you're really respected. You've earned that space. You've sort of served, your time, and so now you step into a room and you have my attention. With the Gen Z folks, not so much,
Yeah.
because it could mean very different. It could mean something like, well, maybe you're stuck on your ways. Maybe your traditional views aren't as innovative as they should be. There's a better way, a faster way of doing things. So I may not necessarily follow you just because you have that title. You need to sort of earn my trust before I then follow you blindly.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the perception leads, so from older generations who are trying to lead younger generations, they view kind of the questioning or the challenging almost as
Mhm.
disrespectful.
Yeah.
In actuality, Gen Z just has a different definition of what it means to be a leader. So to be a
Yeah.
leader is to be welcoming and to be kind of responsive and to address those questions. Whereas older generations are kind of, and feel free to push back to let me know if you disagree, but older generations are of the mindset of, why are you questioning me? Almost
Oh
like
yeah.
complete contradiction. So have you
Yeah.
seen that?
Absolutely. So, my parents
Yeah.
were quite different in the sense where my opinion mattered and they asked for a lot of my opinions. However, when they had strong opinions about something, it's a this is what I'm saying, this is what it is, because I
And
said
that's
so,
it. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
No
Or we
questions
got the
asked.
chancla.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then now even sometimes within like younger generation, like my children, they're just like, okay, because you said so, but why? But why? And so sometimes it could be a little frustrating between generations and having to really understand how they intertwine, how they work, and that it's okay to understand the why. So for millennials, it's a different thing because we grew up with the this is what I say because I said so. We tend to believe that leadership should be collaborative, very
Hmm.
inclusive, very inspirational. So we have a lot of like coaching, mentorship. This is where that started to kind of grow within the workforce. Feedback is, feedback driven, the coaching style, the transparency. And so for me, when I'm coaching folks as a millennial and my point of view, I'm always explaining the why naturally, right? So for us, just organically, it was a lot easier to then merge and understand a Gen Z perspective because I was always explaining this is how we have to do these things, and this is why. However, if you have a different solution or a different alternative sort of point of view, please share. We're open to it, right? As opposed to more of the older generation, typically, not always, but typically, it's more of the there is a method to the madness. This is what's worked. why break it if it's continuing to work, right? So there is some truth to that. However, with how technology is advancing, with how the workplace is advancing, with now different challenges, whether it be DEI or different things that are coming up, the questioning is sort of like necessary.
Gotcha. Yeah, I definitely agree. I wanted to circle back to something you said a little bit earlier. So you did share something along the lines of traditional or older generation leaders. They
Mhm,
tend to be respected or they expect to be respected in terms of I have X number of years of experience. I've been doing this for so long. Whereas younger
mhm,
generations, that doesn't really resonate as much with them. So here's where I'm going with this. When it comes to new job applicants, we see also that divide where older generations tend to, if we see somebody job hopping a lot, they tend to say, well, this person's not been there, more than a couple years. We can't trust them. Whereas younger generations almost interpret it the exact opposite. This person has been with an organization for too long. We can't trust them.
mhm.
Are you seeing something similar? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's a very difficult sort of hack to kind of break
Yeah.
when I work with a lot of business owners. My conversation really has to be tailored to their point of views. A lot of it, yes, is generational beliefs, but a lot of it is more so of having them really understand a different perspective and a different why. So, is there truth to a job hopper being inconsistent, or not reliable? Sometimes that's the case, right? You may find that maybe the person is very undecisive. They're doing something because they're getting paid for it, but not necessarily their passion. So I think that's where really HR has become a little bit more administrative than I would hope for, because you really need to learn and to look into it and to read into it and to do a lot more in recruitment to understand if it's the right profile for the organization. So there's a lot more digging to it. There's a lot of AI tools that are sort of replacing that and kind of screening through different keywords. And that doesn't typically work. So, the, however, the times that I have personally seen and myself gone from one job to another, those are the times where I've gotten hikes and
Yeah.
salary increases that really get me to a market range that is acceptable for where I live and for my lifestyle. So if I had stayed in an organization from the very beginning for so long, you can expect a 3-5% increase year after year. But if you then job hop to another one, you'll get a bigger increase. And that's just the reality of it, whether business owners or people will like to admit it or not. And so is there something wrong in that? Not necessarily, right?
Yeah.
It's just is what it is. Sometimes also, if the organization is not operating or has promised something that is not being delivered, they were sort of like bamboozled into a position, and
Yeah.
then different things start coming out and sort of like peeling the layers, then the person's going to job hunt and start moving. And then there's another perspective as to a Gen Z sort of generation where they don't really like a lot of conflict. And so
Mm,
if there's a sort of issue in the workplace, instead of having to bring that issue up to a manager, they're just immediately going to take the easy route and start looking for a job. Now, is that a bad thing? It's just the reality of things. And so that's where I feel like the workplace and HR and the business owners should really focus on creating a culture of trust and safety, to where we're having these conversations and we're able to really transparently communicate about salaries, expectations, work-life balance, all of these things that are sort of like taboo to talk about, because that will have the retention that that the company is expecting.
yeah. And I think to your point, being that we live in a capitalistic society, we tend to punish individuals who behave capitalistically. So what I mean by that is if you are going to get bigger pay raises by moving, why wouldn't somebody do that? We can't then punish
Right.
individuals who live to those values, which apparently the US does value. And so it
Yeah.
makes total sense. And so you also mentioned, and I'm bringing this back, AI. And I think that
Mhm.
is going to be fundamentally a game changer. So I think from a technical skills perspective, it'll help with HR, it'll help with accounting, marketing, kind of those more technical areas. Do you see AI playing a role when it comes to effectively leading others? And if so, what role do you see it playing?
Hmm. So it's quite
Yeah,
scary, right?
yeah.
When you start seeing AI and all of its capabilities and so on. Um, in theory, yes, if humans didn't need motivation,
Yeah,
emotional
for
connection,
robots. Yeah,
or purpose, then AI could lead, right? Based on data, logic, and efficiency alone. 100%. But the thing is, we're not robots, right? We don't work
gotcha.
like them. We do need more of emotional intelligence. We need trust. We need coaching. We need a vision. We need a purpose. So, when we really start kind of getting into how humans actually work and what happens in a workplace, leaders are navigating grief, burnout, ambition, ego, fear. And that real human messiness is not something that AI can manage.
Gotcha. And so I'm going to share this hypothetical. So a colleague and I were having, I don't know if it's a conversation, discussion, debate, but we were having this related to AI. And
Mhm.
so AI in theory has access to the entire internet. So it can be as empathetic, as emotionally intelligent, as engaged as the most engaged, emotional intelligent individuals ever. And it can position wording, position phrasing, position conversation in a way that best resonates with each individual. Do you think
Mhm.
that's a reality? Do you think that's realistic? That's something that can actually take place?
You see, the thing is that people are continuously evolving and changing.
Mm,
So it's quite different. It's hard because who you are today is not going to be who you are a month from now or 2 months from now. So it could definitely stay, if you were to remain consistent, it could tap into who you are, your preferred language, the way that to approach you, to best resonate with what your values are, what your vision is. But who I was and my vision, my mission 10 years from ago is not who I am now. So a lot of the data also, yes, although it's broad and it's getting it from so many different places, it's still data entered by humans. So, and it's not necessarily entered by every single one, and we're all changing. So, is it going to be consistent or accurate for everyone at all times? I don't know. I don't think so.
yeah. Yeah, and that's the crazy part. And that's what really worries me or freaks me out is I'm not saying this is the case, but kind of thinking of it from a logical perspective, AI can create custom communication to each individual that best resonates with them based on a profile that exists online. So whether that's, TikTok,
Mhm.
Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, it I don't know if this is happening already, but this is something that I can see AI tapping into. So it'll take a profile of me, David.
Mhm.
These are your different social medias. This is how you communicate, and I'm going to customize how I communicate with you. In theory, let's say a chat GPT or a Gemini or a Perplexity, any one of these AI companies, they can sell that to a company to say to get the most out of David, here is what motivates him the most. And then
Mhm.
boom, there's a kind of an AI leader that'll get extract the most out of me. Do you think that's a reality that'll happen sometime soon?
It's already happening.
Okay, tell me more.
Yeah, there's with generative AI, right? And all of these
Yeah.
different functions that are really kind of going into your preferred options, and even with the algorithms with social media, you're clicking on
Hmm.
something because you like it, you're staying tuned to things because you like them or you want to know more or hear more. And so it's then pushing that same sort of data and algorithm, more of that content into your feed. What then you have to be aware, and what people need to do is really be open to both all different sides of the perspective. So even if you don't agree with a topic, still stay tuned for it and listen to it and hear it out, and just kind of consider, because you need to have that sort of more amplified outlook on what is actually happening. I think this is, I don't want to say just an issue for younger generations, also older generations, especially older generations that are getting a lot of their news from Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah.
It tends to be quite scary, and AI has become so realistic that you look at a video and you just take it for a fact. It's a news
Hmm.
video, news broadcast, and it's completely bogus. It's not true. It's completely manufactured by AI. So it's quite scary on how real it's become. And now you have to really question everything and really research a lot of things and look into it, which who has the time for that? So it's becoming really, really tough.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be critical. Those AI stories, AI influencers, AI potentially entire media companies that
Yeah.
are they're just not real. And so, yeah, I don't know what that, or I don't know how that's going to play out. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, but also still leaning into AI. So with a leader, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. So when it comes to leaders and it comes to leadership, there we don't necessarily rely as much on technical expertise, but on being able to guide and to what's what I'm looking for, massage, for lack of a better term,
Mhm.
individual team members to move in the same direction. So I think one of the reasons or the linchpins of why a leader exists is communication starts to break down from the business leader, the CEO, that individual, and as it starts to trickle down to the rest of the organization. I actually think technology and AI can bridge that gap. So I don't know, with that said, what the purpose of a leader would then be, because from my perspective, their primary objective is to guide others towards the vision of the business leader. But if the business leader can interact directly with employees, do we still need them? And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it kind of goes back to just the nuances and what people actually face, right? Should you be 100% transparent when an organization is experiencing uncertainty? What
It's
is
a
the
good
risk
question.
with being truly 100% transparent? I think in the workforce, you really have to kind of question the pros and cons to that, because as much as I love transparency, there are certain things that if I were to tell you from a business perspective what the truth is of my business, let's say today. However, I know that it's depending on a few variables and it may change next week. I may actually cause more harm than good by telling you what I'm fearing today, right? What may happen. There may be a client that's not closing, and because that client is not closing, then we're now not having enough profit to continue to have you on board. We may consider layoffs. But then what if next week then we close 3 deals and now it's like we not actually need to hire more people? I've actually and I've started now this trickle effect where you started to look for work. You've become more nervous, causing fear. You're not really able to focus on your work. So it really does need human intervention, and you need to then question, but it doesn't have to be, again, it's not administrative sort of intervention. It needs to really be a more sort of business analytical mindset as to how much do we know right now and what information needs to trickle down to the bottom. Otherwise, it's going to cause more harm than good. And AI with that, it may be a good solution, but again, it's not necessarily going to manage the emotions, the motivation. There's a lot of conversations that I'll have with employees on an HR perspective that involves more of career ambition. Are you happy with what you're doing? Is it meeting your purpose? Are you fulfilled? What is your career expectation? Where would you like to be in 5 years, or a year from now? And sometimes that may shift or change for different folks depending on where they are in their lives, especially for younger generations that are coming into a workplace and then perhaps after a year or two, it's not what they thought it was. And so now they want to kind of try something different. And as opposed to them just saying, okay, well, you're not able to fulfill these jobs responsibilities, we're going to cut you loose. Now I'm thinking, well, I don't want to lose you as a talent because you're definitely a high producer, you're valued, you're really good for this company. And now let me sort of like reshift. How can I repurpose you, and what can you do that makes sense for the company, but also makes sense for you as a professional? That's not something that AI will then question. It's just going to be cut and dry, right? You're not doing
Mhm.
this, then it's not for you. And a lot of organizations operate that way, and it's not the best way, I think. So that's where the
Yeah,
conflict comes. Yeah.
gotcha. And so I definitely agree. Maybe being too transparent, maybe what's the word that I'm looking for? May rub individuals the wrong way. 100% transparency may not always be the best approach. Definitely align with that. But it sounds as though from a leadership perspective, that is a key role. And so I want to get your thoughts on this idea. So this is one I've been muddling around a little bit with. So from a leadership perspective, if being able to triage information is kind of a key expectation, what if we, instead of having someone be a leader, we bring them down to more of a project manager where they still have that expectation. They're still aligning individuals on a goal. They're still being that buffer between kind of the business leader and the rest of the team, but they're not viewed as higher than. They're viewed more as, okay, this is another partner on the team, not necessarily above me or, from that perspective. Do you think
Mhm.
individuals would still be as interested or as motivated to become leaders if it doesn't come with that bump in status, but instead it becomes another member of the team or another role within the team? What are your thoughts there?
So I think AI can definitely run the operations,
Okay,
but it can't build the loyalty, right?
gotcha.
Leadership is still a human business. However, kind of going back to what you're saying, um, it becomes it becomes quite difficult to. There are some generations, I'll rephrase. There are some
Yep.
generations that will kind of look at leadership as just added responsibility
Right.
for the same pay. And I get what you're saying, and that's kind of where we're leaning. Why be a leader
Hmm.
if it's going to just be the same sort of pay and just more expectations? You're just now adding a different layer, different hat, different roles. Now I have to work more harder for the same thing. In that sort of culture and workplace, it that doesn't make sense, and it happens quite often. However, if there is some sort of incentive, if there is a reward as to why you should become a leader, and we instill in other generations, younger generations, to be a leader means that you have people follow you, respect you, you're motivating others. Something is your purpose is beyond yourself. It's now to help others and that sort of thing. I think people would be more willing and able to do that and continue that path because again, it is very human. So it's always going to be needed in a workplace, but the incentive definitely needs to be there. Because if you're just going to tell me to add more responsibility for the same pay, why?
Yeah. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and I'm going to pull in kind of a totally different field. And so I agree with the idea we need to incentivize leaders, but I'm also trying to bridge that with the idea of democracy versus capitalism versus leaders are, should they be voted in? Is essentially the question I'm going to ask. So we live in a democratic society here within the US, but most employees, from my experience, most organizations and most employees who report into a leader, they have virtually no say in terms of who they're going to be led by. And I see that as a contradiction to the society we live in, where we vote in who's going to be our governor, our mayor, our president. And these two, I see them in a huge conflict, and I don't know what to do about that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, business will will stop if you're now like voting everybody
Yeah,
into
good
you have
point.
to vote somebody into a position. It's not necessarily going to flow as quickly as it sometimes needs to. There definitely needs to be a bridge to both. And uh, just because you're a leader doesn't mean you have all the say and the only say. You should definitely, I strongly believe in a leader being a working leader. So just because you're a manager or director does not mean that you have to come off the field 100%. A good leader is going to roll up their sleeves and be a working manager, because at that point you don't disconnect from the reality and what your workers are going through and facing the challenges because they're forever changing. So what you used to face years ago is not going to be what's happening now. um, you're also earning the respect from your teammates. And at the same time, I think it's very important for employees to also rate their leaders
Yeah.
and give them feedback um, in a good culture, in a good structure or organization, because sometimes that can be a little tricky to.
I agree 1,000%. And I know depending on the industry, depending on the organization, they struggle with that.
Yeah.
How do employees give their leaders feedback? Should employees give their leaders feedback? And how should they interpret it? What should the expectation be? Do you have any recommendations or best practices when it comes to employees potentially providing feedback to their leaders?
Yes, the number one step is the culture needs to be
Gotcha.
set up correctly because you need to ensure that there is no fear of retaliation. That's the number one thing is if I give my manager bad feedback, he's
Yeah,
going to give me a less promote. He's going
yeah.
to knock me. He's not going to promote me. He's going to, probably terminate me. Bias and subjectivity. If you ask me for my feedback and then take no action on my feedback,
Mm,
that's a huge, huge pain that will then actually hurt the business a lot more than help. So if you're not ready to take any action, you should not ask for feedback at that moment. And then obviously undermine authority if it's mishandled. So if you're creating a culture that is really keeping these bad cons in mind, then you can really establish a sort of 360 review where everyone's giving feedback on each other and it's more of a motivational, inspiring sort of we're all in it together. We're all in it for this mission, for this purpose. We are all improving and you see the benefits out of it, then it would work. But if the culture is not set up for that, it's a disaster.
agreed 10,000%. And one of the, I don't want to call it a leadership philosophy, but workplace philosophies, workplace approaches that I really align with is called radical candor. Are you familiar with it by any chance? A little bit of a story time. So
Yeah.
I had an opportunity to earlier in my career work with Netflix, and my supervisor at the time, she was working with the author who created the idea of radical candor, and she was experimenting with this leadership or workplace philosophy at Twitter and I think Apple. But essentially, it hinges on two key pillars. Pillar number one is you need to care deeply about those you work with, not just who they are in the workplace, but who are they outside of the workplace? What does their family look like? What do their interests look like? What do they like to do during their free time? Getting to know the entire person. So that is pillar number one. By first developing those robust and caring relationships, we can then engage in pillar two, which is challenging directly. So to your point, in order for us to be able to be open and transparent with providing feedback, we have to know it comes from a good place. Because if you were to tell me, David, your last, I don't know, report was sloppy, or your analysis was all over the place, or whatever the case may be. In order for me not to take offense, I have to know you're sharing that with me because you care about me, because you know who I am. But I can only do that if we've taken the time to deliberately first, pillar one, get to know each other deeply, care deeply, so then we can challenge each other directly and then start having those open and candid conversations. And so I had my first experience with that at Netflix, and it is a radically different culture because their
Hmm.
feedback is happening all the time from everybody in all directions. And it was my first time being exposed to that. And it's a little uncomfortable at first, especially when,
Yeah.
you're given a presentation, then you're asked to stay after, and then right away it was that didn't land. It's like, whoa, I've never, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it took me a little while to get comfortable with that. But after being exposed to it, there's no other way to operate. So an analogy I like to use to kind of help really people fully understand what it feels like. So I'm one of six children. I have four brothers, and we're always talking trash to each other. We're always making
Hmm.
fun of each other. We're always, just picking at each other. It's what brothers do. But if one of my brothers were to tell me, David, you know what? You're actually slipping, and I think you need to improve on X, Y, and Z, I would really pay attention to that because I know he cares deeply about me. On the flip side, let's say if I were out shopping, I was going to 7-Eleven and some random person were to give me the exact same feedback with all the exact same recommendations, I would not take that seriously at all because we haven't taken the time to develop those relationships. And so that's the
Hmm.
analogy I like to use.
Yeah.
With that,
And I think you actually answered your question. And this
okay,
is why I say AI can't really
there
replace
you go.
leadership because you need the human connection. You need that true connection. And this is kind of what I get to. So the terminology wasn't so familiar with, but as far as like the strategy, absolutely. And this is something that I use on my day-to-day practice. You need to know the people that you're working with. You need to understand and know them on a human level. What happens a lot in the corporate space is that a lot of leaders tend to have meetings that are just checkpoints. It's just go down the list and it's just like, how are you doing? Do you need any help? And any questions? Yeah, I'm here for you. and then click buy. That really doesn't do anything. You're not establishing a relationship, you're not establishing rapport, there's no trust. And so, why would that person then, uh, especially if they're in a very bad moment, maybe they're going through a divorce, maybe somebody passed away, whatever it may be, they're very private. They don't have that trust with you, so they're not sharing that information. And you now give them negative feedback. Now they're going to take this person's against me. This person's completely, they're out for me. They're coming to get, and they're going, and then they start really challenging back as opposed to really receiving your feedback, embracing it, and kind of taking it forward. So you really need to know what's happening with your employees, know your team, have that playful banter, have that relationship. And when you do that, then the feedback is going to be well received, very much like what you described with your siblings, right? You're going to receive it and you're going to, okay, this person does have my best interest in mind. So absolutely, I'm going to listen to them, right? And you also, by knowing the person, you understand how they receive and take feedback. So I may be more direct with some. I'll be a lot more careful with others, right? Depending on where they are, how they understand it, and the terminology and verbiage. So sometimes, I'll have to rephrase and tailor, which takes a lot of coaching for leadership. Not everybody can do leadership just because, they were promoted into it. It requires a lot of mentorship for it.
Gotcha. And so the ultimate question I have for you, Gabby, is in 2025, is leadership still a thing? Do we still need it? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Perfect.
Absolutely. I think, again, AI is going to lead the process, but um, Gen Z is going to lead the people. We have a lot of generations that are really embracing coaching and mentorship. So there's definitely going to be a lot more demand. But there's a high requirement of emotional intelligence coaching and mentorship that needs to be considered when being a really efficient leader.
Definitely got to have that connection. So with that, if people wanted to find out more about you or to connect with you, where would you recommend they look?
Definitely. So you can search me on Instagram with that the Gabriela Enriquez, or on our website www.hrbpinc.com, and shoot us an email, shoot us a message, and definitely happy to connect. We do a lot of coaching and business advisory.
Perfect. All right, Gabby. Well, it was a pleasure having you on I303, and you have a good one.
Thank you. You too.